Hello, and you are very welcome along to this week's RTÉ Rugby podcast. The Autumn Nation series is behind us from an Ireland point of view. 13-10 win against Australia last weekend makes it 3 out of 3 for Ireland, but plenty of work to do heading into next season. We'll also be talking about the URC back this weekend. We've Ulster and Zebra on Friday night, Leinster taking on Glasgow Warriors on Saturday, but the big game of the weekend is Munster against Connacht Saturday evening at Thomond Park. Delighted to be joined by Bernard Jackman and Mick Kearney again this week. Guys, how are you doing? Thanks a million for joining us.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, mate, for having me.
You're very welcome. Mick, big game this weekend. Terran Ure, repeat of the final. How are you set for that?
Massive game, massive. Yeah, getting there now. We obviously have a bit of disappointment of losing the last fixture against Young Munster away. So there was a nice bit of bite to training last night, which is exactly what you'd want going into a fixture like this.
Bert, you could do worse than paying your tenner in the gate for that at Castle Avenue on Saturday afternoon, yeah?
Yeah, it's going to be great atmosphere. And then on the pitch, I think you're going to have two really good teams. Turner being going really well, but obviously Tar for the champions. And I expect Tar to step back up again after that defeat to Young Munster. But that's going to be a great game. Yeah, it's going to be really good.
Yeah, it'd be fantastic. If it's anything like the All-Ireland League final a few months ago, be well worth going to or checking out the highlights next week. But guys, we'll get straight into the Ireland stuff. So, Birch, 3 wins out of 3. Overall, though, the tone seems to be, from an Ireland point of view, there's still a lot more work to do in 2023. I mean, if you were to compare this to the reaction after 2018 when Ireland had a fantastic season, it's definitely a more realistic tone at the moment, I think, and a more, I suppose, foundation is probably what it is rather than the end product at the moment, isn't it?
Yeah, for sure. And I think obviously we've learned from 2018 where maybe we got a bit ahead of ourselves. Plus, I think the nature of the wins, I mean, 2 very tight wins in the autumn. International rugby, the quality is so compact at the moment. I mean, you're seeing very tight test matches. You're seeing teams like Wales get beaten by Georgia, Australia get beaten by Italy, Australia nearly being able to beat Ireland. Definitely could have had a draw at least if they had went for the kick. South Africa, who've had 2 losses, but I think they're in a good place, in terms of their squad development, in terms of how they're playing. So, yeah, I think we're very aware that the world number one, it's great to have it, but realistically, I think the top 6 or 7 teams can beat each other on any given day. And we have areas to work on. And we probably the part of the game that got us to number 1 in the world, which was this attacking game, hasn't functioned as well. And that's because the opposition have clear plans to stop us. So now it's a case of being able to evolve that and get that back functioning again, despite the fact that teams have a clear philosophy around how to slow us down.
Mick, are you in the glass half full category or the glass half empty? Like, are teams cottoning on to Ireland, and is that a bit worrying, or are you seeing it as Ireland grinding out 2 hard-fought wins against South Africa and Australia when they're not necessarily playing at their best?
Yeah, I'd definitely be glass half full. As you said, I think it was 2 unbelievably attritional games, and from a positives point of view, for me, looking at it, like historically, taking Leinster as an example, they've struggled against kind of bigger packs, more physical teams, and I think with the South African game in particular, it was great to see them go out there and really impose themselves physically in the game and not come undone there. I'd imagine Dave Rennie would be quite frustrated after the game on Saturday from the point of view that Tupou goes down injured. And I think from an impact off the bench kind of standpoint, he was thinking, right, I'm going to have Tupou on for the last kind of 25, 30 minutes, and then I'm going to have Skelton on there with him. And, there are 2 kind of body shapes that Ireland might have struggled against in more recent times. But going back to your more recent point, glass half full for me. I think it's two great wins. The games, as Bert's mentioned, could have gone either way, but I think Ireland should just be delighted to come out the right side of it, because at the end of the day, winning's a habit, so if they can keep stacking wins on wins, it can only stand them in good stead going into the next couple of months.
Yeah, and obviously like only the second time they've ever beaten Australia, New Zealand, and South Africa in a calendar year as well. But Bert, you mentioned the attack and how South Africa and Australia have seemed to get a good read defensively on what Ireland were doing. Can you give us an idea of what it was that South Africa and Australia have been doing and what they've seen in the Ireland attack that they were kind of able to counter so well?
Yeah, look, I think it's about stopping the rhythm, stopping Ireland rhythm. Don't let them play tempo. Being very aware of marking the ball rather than the man as such. So those second man plays that Ireland played a little bit in the second half. There was no opportunity for. So when they played through the first set of forwards out the back, and then you got your hard runners. We've been used to splitting teams in half there, getting soft carries, getting offloads, but we were shut down. Very similar to what La Rochelle did against Leinster, and the Leinster plan is quite similar to Ireland's plan. Not surprisingly, given so many players double up. But yeah, it's been nice to compact in your D, and then being very physical at the breakdown and being willing to give away penalties. So, like if you think about it, Australia's discipline was poor, but most of the ill discipline was on the attacking breakdown. With obviously
the neck
rolls, neck rolls, yeah. But they managed to slow Ireland's ball down very well on defensive breakdowns as well, without giving away many penalties, and just make the game stop-start, take away flow. Don't let Ireland get any soft repossessions in the air and the contestables. And Ireland actually probably took a step back in terms of their aerial ability this November, which had been a strength for them. And yeah, it's not rocket science. It's just being able to do it. You know what I mean? And the bigger, more physical teams have the capacity to do that. And Australia, I think, in terms of athleticism, are a powerful team, and obviously, that was with Tupu not being able to play for long. But we saw Skelton, just that one good carry he gets, just creates disorganization in the Irish defensive line, and it's a try. And I think that teams like Australia, South Africa, France, that's always going to be an area of concern for us. Just the physical power they have.
Very, very quickly on Australia, Birch, like in terms of broad strokes, how did you think they went on Saturday? Because obviously we were chatting to Christy Doran during the week, and they've been terribly out of form. And if they lose this weekend against Wales, it's potentially the worst year the international side have ever had. How do you see them 12 months out from a World Cup, considering they are on the softer side of the draw?
Yeah, look, I spent some time on Friday in their camp, and you could sense the pressure. You could sense the pressure. But I think what you saw was a team who certainly believe in Dave Rennie and the coaching staff. I mean, they're aware of the rumors that they need to beat Wales or Ireland to keep Rennie in a job. And I think what we saw was an incredibly committed, fired up Wallabies who want to get a win and keep him in a job. They believe in him. They've got a good coaching staff. They've just been riddled with injuries. I mean, so unlucky. Going back to the Wallabies series against England in the summer when Quade Cooper got injured in the warm up, all the way through, and the game at the weekend. I mean, the amount of injuries they had during the game, and now they have guys. I saw Will Skelton at the airport Sunday morning heading to La Rochelle because this test is outside the window.
Michael Hooper's ruled out as of this morning as well.
Yeah, they're just getting no break whatsoever, and they play Wales. They needed the money. I think this test is worth $2 million to them. Wales are paying them $2 million to play this extra test. But Dave Rennie 6 weeks ago when they met up couldn't have predicted that the squad who plays Wales this weekend would be as badly affected by everything, and I think they'll beat Wales. I think they'll beat Wales, and I actually think they have their team with a lot of potential. They're on the easy side of the draw, the World Cup. Obviously, their group isn't that easy, but if they can get through that, which they will, I think you bring Karevi back in there, you bring Quade Cooper back in there. I thought the halfbacks played a much smarter kicking game at the weekend. And this tour will have actually found them 2 or 3 players as well. So I don't think Australian rugby is going to stay where they are at the moment, 8th in the world. I think they're better than that. I don't think they're going to win the World Cup, but I think they're certainly not. I wouldn't write them off yet at all.
Yeah, and we mentioned Taniela Tupo as well. Big doubt for the World Cup now as well after that Achilles injury. That would be a massive blow for him. But Mick, on the Irish side of things, excuse me, you spoke about we're talking glass half full. What are in terms of the positives to take from it? I don't know. I'm kind of throwing out ideas here. One of the positives I would take from it is the efficiency of the attack when they actually were in a position to score. They kind of struggled to get into that position a lot of the time, I think, aside from the Fiji game, really. But I would look back to the games in New Zealand over the summer and even some of the Six Nations games where they were really hitting it on attack and getting so many opportunities and probably leaving a half a dozen try-scoring opportunities back out on the pitch in every single game. But if you look at the South Africa game, they got 2 tries off a small amount of real good opportunities. And again, on Saturday, they just had the 1 try. But aside from the try they did score, there was maybe that 10-minute period in the first half where they had a lot of control in the 2022. Aside from that, they didn't get many other opportunities. So at the very least, they were converting the majority of the chances they were getting.
No, for sure. I thought they were incredibly clinical. A lot of the work that they were doing into the seam around line-out time, they'd obviously done their homework there, like bringing Doris into the seam, having Dan Sheehan come around into that space, obviously by the seam, I mean the back of the line-out and the first defender for Australia. But as Birch mentioned, when teams are going as heavy at the breakdown defensively as Australia and South Africa were, like, it makes an unbelievably difficult game. Like, again, as Birch mentioned, getting out of your flow, like in key positions, is like, it can completely like stifle attack, and trying to get that momentum again is very, very difficult. You need to have a big carry from someone, or you need, someone to just get a half yard through the defensive line. But if you're playing against big bodies, like, it's a very, very tough thing to do. Obviously when Ireland got into the red zone, the few opportunities they had in both of those games, they converted. And again, that's a really positive sign going forward. They need to execute getting into those areas. Because if they don't, like, teams are so good at exiting nowadays and so good at getting back into your territory that it becomes a tough challenge if you're not very clinical in those spaces.
Were the exits part of the reason they found themselves under a lot of pressure in that first half as well, Mick? Like, there were some of those kicks, they just weren't getting a real distance on the kicks to touch. They were probably only bringing them up maybe between the 22 and the 10-meter line, and you're still kind of under a little bit of pressure in that regard. Is that kind of something to work on next year?
Absolutely. And again, there's loads to that. Like, the more effective Ireland can be in terms of their exit mauls, I suppose, if they can get that rolling, then they suddenly have a kick or run option as opposed to just the kick option. You want that winger, you want the opposition winger on the edge to have to make a decision to go, okay, well, am I gonna stay high here, or am I gonna drop back? And obviously, if he drops back, you can have a bit of a crack, and you might be kicking from 13 as opposed to kicking from 9 and 10, and hopefully you're getting a bit more distance out of your exits then.
And Birch, on the other side of the ball defensively, Australia had upwards of 8 minutes possession in the Irish 22 alone on Saturday, and probably even more if you're talking just outside it. But to concede just 26 points against the Wallabies and South Africa in games where they were under a lot of pressure defensively, that's a pretty good win for Simon Easterby and the work he's doing on defence.
Look, I think Simon Easterby and his section have had a very positive November. Well, probably all the plaudits have been going to our attack and some of our line-out detail, Paul O'Connell, Mike Cass. This November has been Simon Easterby's time to shine. And, the Wallabies, as Mick has said, is, they've got powerful athletes, they've got footwork. They've got a very intricate attacking system. Scott Wisemantle, the most travelled attack coach has implemented, and it's dangerous. And I thought we never panicked. Our discipline was very strong. Our tackle technique selection was excellent. Our spacing, everything about our defence was excellent. And they had a massive focus all week on the attacking breakdown because they respected that Ireland, in terms of stats, are the third most turnovers in tier 1 countries, with Omani and Tyburn being the biggest threats, and they dealt with that really well. The Aussies were very aware of how dangerous Ireland were there, so I think it was phenomenal, and it gives us massive confidence, because we need to be able to win different ways. We probably don't have the scrum. We don't have the scrum of the Georgians who can beat Wales with a scrum alone. We don't have our line-up maul. Think about it. The Josh Van der Fleer try against South Africa. I mean, it's a worldly. It's not something that you would back on. Again, and we tried it against. We went for that front spin against Australia, and we didn't score off it. So, and that's a sign. I mean, that's a sign that we don't feel we have the power to drive them over with a conventional one. So we're looking for wrinkles, and even the Caelan Doris play, it was brilliant. But it's probably signed the fact that we had to go to that because we knew we didn't have the tools to maul them over. So if we don't have a hugely dominant scrum, a hugely dominant maul, and they can stop our attack, we need to defend. And I think the lads will have got massive faith in that, and assurance that we can stop teams when we lose the possession battle.
Yeah, and I thought it was really interesting. You mentioned the maul they tried for the Josh Van der Fleer try against South Africa when they did go for it again against Australia. It's just really interesting to see how teams can kind of prepare, because you saw as it spun around towards the near touchline, I think it was Nick White and possibly another Australian defender were just there waiting for it to happen. I just thought it was a really interesting kind of example of a team does something one week and opposition have it studied and are ready for it to happen. It's just a kind of an interesting way of seeing how the defense works.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's a challenge, and that's why the next time we try that Caelan Doris peel, the tail gunner will probably get there a little bit earlier, and it won't be as obvious. But look, that's the beauty of international rugby, and that's the beauty for the likes of Paul O'Connell or Simon Easterby or Mike Catt. They now have from now till February effectively to look at what's their preferred strike plays in the first 2 games, and then just build on that. So it's a game of cat and mouse, and that's why I said I spent 2.5 hours with their analyst, and it was just I looked at their Ireland preview, and it was 60 pages. Now obviously some of that is too much information, but the key points around where Ireland's strengths were, what Ireland's rocks are, how we're going to take them away, where Ireland's weaknesses are, and something like that front peel was obviously something that was flagged, talked about, and a plan was put in place. And it's harder to go repeat. But in 6 or 7 games, again, it's time to take it out of the game plan book.
Yeah, dust it off once more. Mick, on in terms of personnel, I suppose is one of the positives from the last few weeks. 3 games, 3 starts for 3 different out halves, and I know obviously one of those was 20 minutes beforehand with Jack Crowley coming in for Johnny Sexton, but I think if you were to ask a lot of people before this window what did they want to see, they wanted to see at least 1, possibly 2 other out halves getting a start during the 3 matches.
Absolutely. I think if you ask the majority of the public pre-emerging Ireland tour, the famed tour that I think, if the provinces are being honest, they didn't really want to happen. If you ask the public, Jesus, do you think Jack Crowley is going to start one of the November tests? They'd all say no, absolutely not. Jack's kind of, he's maybe not even getting his foot in the door in Munster as much as he'd like at the moment. So it's a huge positive. And I thought, considering the circumstances, he had a cracking game on Saturday. I thought he was massively helped out by having Stu McCluskey outside him, just almost from a comforting point of view. If he was in any kind of doubt, he'd just ship it off to Stu, and the likelihood of him going forward or getting a bit of gain line was pretty high, But I thought, all the 10s played well in the 3 games, but in particular on Saturday, the energy and the variety that Crowley brought, there was times defensively where I seen him kind of trying to barge rucks, which is fairly unconventional for a 10. But yeah, look, obviously the big topic is, if Johnny goes down, who's going to step in? And as you mentioned, seeing 2 guys get plenty of game time, I think is a massive positive.
How did you think he went on Saturday, Birch? Given, given the size of the occasion, given the fact he was brought in 20 minutes beforehand, given the fact that he's played 20 odd games for Munster in his professional career, like this was an enormous step up in every sense. How did you think he went?
No, I think he did perfectly fine. Given the way the game went, and we were kind of stuck in our own 22 for so long, given the fact that we didn't have any quality ball, I thought he showed enough when he got opportunities to touch it, that he was well capable. That was a huge test match to come into, and anyone expecting him to have a man of the match performance in his first start with a late entry to the game, plus the way the game went. The game wasn't, Ireland on the front foot. But I thought in the second half, before he went off, I thought he started to show his array of passing. We know he's got a lot of composure. Everybody who's worked with him and works with him feel he has this level of confidence and self-belief and drive that's going to be the point of difference for him. And that's not knocking others. Ross Byrne has it as well. He has that belief in himself and ability to have big moments. But I just think it's been a brilliant November for him, in that he's got his first cap, plus he's got that chance to start. Because let's be honest, opportunities are going to be rare. We're going to Six Nations now with obviously the two big teams coming to Dublin.
In other circumstances, if everything had gone to plan, Jack Crowley potentially could have been waiting another 2 years to start a test match like Australia.
100%. So I actually think it's going to work out well in Ireland's favour and his favour. What's going to be massive now is him starting for Munster. That's going to be a huge part of his development. I don't see him getting a huge amount of time for Ireland in the Six Nations. So, but obviously then that keeps Joey out. So it depends on how Joey's injury is. It's probably unfortunate that both our second and third choice 10 are playing the same team. But I suppose from the other point of view, Joey's been so unlucky with injuries to get a run of games. If Crowley gets ahead of Ben Healy, he naturally will get some decent game time, and probably, with either Connor or Craig, who maybe is his partner coming off the bench for Ireland or whatever. So it's really important that we found that next guy in line after Johnny and Joey. And obviously, let's be honest, Ross put his hand up again because he seemed to be in the wilderness, and I just think Farrell now knows if he needs someone who has the ability to have a clutch moment, Ross won't be found wanting.
Yeah, and whether or not it leads to more caps for Ross Byrne, we'll find out down the line. But just for the moment of itself, Mick, it was just a really, really nice thing for Ross Byrne to be able to have, because he's someone, I think, in his previous 13 caps has been chucked into some fairly unforgiving situations across it. Like, you think of that game against England at Twickenham just before the last World Cup, which was kind of held against him for a long time. But I mean, Jesus, he was thrown into the wolves in that one with an Ireland team that had been run off their feet in Portugal for several days. It was a hiding to nothing. And he's had a few tough outings since then for Ireland. But we spoke to him afterwards in the kind of mix zone, and honestly, I can't remember seeing a player buzzing to that extent. Because normally, yourself, a lot of you guys, you'll try play it down a little bit after matches. You'll try kind of play it cool, not give away too much. But I mean, he actually had to pause himself at one point and apologize and say, sorry, that I'm still pumping with adrenaline here. This was about an hour after the match when he was showered in his suit. It was really, really refreshing to see someone embrace the moment like that, and just a lovely moment to cap off a game like that for him.
No, big time. Like, I can only imagine how much of a nightmare it is for you guys when someone has a big kicking moment like that and they turn around and thank the fellow who brought on the tea, So instead of just, like, firstly, I'm absolutely delighted for us. As you mentioned, like, he's been thrown into a couple of environments, England away, like, which is, like, it's an unbelievably tough fixture, no matter who you have in your team. But to see him step up like that and just confirm his temperament. He's known for having massive stones and, being very calm and in high pressure situations. Like, even looking back to the Champions Cup quarter final against Ulster a number of years ago, he's literally cramping pre-kick from the touchline, steps up, knocks it over, grand. And looking at that the last day against Australia, I felt like when Ireland got the penalty and he was on, I know James Ryan's mentioned it, he didn't even have to think about making a decision.
Yeah.
Like Ross Byrne was just saying, yeah, give me the ball, it's grand. And he obviously he did the business. So fair play to him. And I'm delighted to hear he was like that after as well, because I think that's something that needs to be more prominent in rugby. If someone does something well, they've prepared all week to do something well. When they actually pull it off, they need to credit themselves for that. Don't be wrong, I know the team helps you and they put you in that situation, but at the same time, I think a level of kind of brashness needs to come into the game from an entertainment point of view as much as anything.
Yeah, and Berchek, if there's one position you probably want a bit of brashness in, it's a number 10, isn't it?
Yeah, well, the fella who starts for Ireland has plenty of us.
What's his name?
Hasn't held him back. Look, I think Ross has it, and he had it since he was in school. I coached him in 2011. He was on Dan Levy's cup team, and he had this sense of belief in himself that was contagious and drove everybody else on. And he's very highly regarded in Leinster. Leinster, if it wasn't for Ross Byrne, Leinster probably would have made a bigger case to keep Joey. Leinster felt that Joey was best positioned for Leinster would have been a fullback rather than 10, because they're very comfortable with Johnny and obviously Ross. And so yeah, people who work with him appreciate him more, I think, than maybe some of the fans, because you don't see the flash stuff that Joey can do, and it's really important. Mark Smith stuff. There's lots of ways to skin a cat, but what Ross brings his team is a lot of assurance and a lot of direction, and the ability then to deal with pressure very well. So I think it's brilliant. I mean, given he must have thought he wasn't going to get back into the Irish team when his brother was getting picked, for Ireland, and I understand why, because Harry's a talented kid. But realistically, Ross was ahead of him in Leinster, and that must have been so difficult to process, mentally, and obviously, then to get that chance due to, getting back into a squad this week. But obviously, Johnny looking like he's fit. You're not going to play. You wonder will he get back in? When Joey's back in the summer, or in the Six Nations, when Joey's back from injury, you have Jack Carty, you have Billy Burns playing every week, whereas obviously Ross doesn't get to play every week if Johnny's playing, and to get that chance of whatever 15 minutes left to come on, and then obviously you have that kick which is just made for him. So delighted for him, and like there's lots of guys out there who not lots of guys like him, but there's guys out there who can do it, just don't ever get the chance.
Yeah, and it's just getting that little tiny break is just the all important thing. If we're flipping that on ahead into next year, and I kind of said, like, we obviously don't know what the future is going to hold for Ross Byrne. He could be in the Six Nations, he might not be. We'll have to wait and see. But who are you, even coming out of players who might have got a small bit of a run over the last few weeks, even guys who didn't get a run over the last few weeks, who would you be potentially trying to buy a little bit of stock in now in 2023 in terms of players, or who do you think whose stock price has kind of risen dramatically in the last few weeks? Like, I imagine Jack Crowley's obviously one. Is Jimmy O'Brien up there as well?
Yeah, Jimmy O'Brien for sure, because obviously his versatility, his left foot, and that, there's going to be one or two players who go to the World Cup, even though the squad is extended to 33, who are able to cover multiple positions. And the South Africa match coming on at 13, early in the game, obviously, the fact that they use his with James Lowe out, they obviously need a left footer, so he's ideal for that, in the backfield for exits, and then obviously being able to play in the wing, and he's a very good player. It was interesting. Easton Asiwa, about four years ago, I asked him what to pick a player, that was going to come through that maybe a lot of people didn't know about, and he named Jimmy O'Brien. So and obviously, he was able to see him in Leinster, and I think he's come through. He hasn't come through overnight, but he's come through slowly, taking his chance, building his repertoire, and his form for this year for Leinster has been excellent. So I think he's done really well. I actually think Treadwell, and Mick, obviously you played with him, but I think he could be a guy you want as your impact lock, off the bench, just to give you some carries late in the game. I'm not saying he'd start all the games for Ireland. But I think he had a decent November and puts him very much in the picture to be in match 23s. And then Finley Bealham, that second half against South Africa, I think it eases a lot of tension and fear around a back up to Tig. They're obviously different, but I think he's shown that he can pin a scrum down under pressure. And I think that, and obviously then you probably look at that Ireland A game against the All Black 15, and the people who played in that, probably a lot of those didn't put their hand up. So but for me it's Treadwell, it's Jimmy O'Brien, it's Finney Bealham, as the non kind of first choice players who did well out this November.
Anyone out of the main crop of players, Mick, that we kind of haven't really given enough credit over the last few weeks?
I thought the guys who generally go about their business quietly but do their job really well just did that again. The likes of James Ryan, just got through a mountain of work as always. But none of it was like overly flash stuff, called the line out really well.
Ryan produced a couple of big individual moments over those couple. I mean, you look back at that line out steal just before halftime against the Springboks game. If they score a try there, it is a completely different match.
100%. Same against the Aussies. Like, you got a steal, I think it was about 10 meters out against the Aussies, which was a massive moment as well. But I thought the main frontliners, the body of work that they got through, like they just went about it in a very impressive manner. But at the same time, it was kind of expected from them as well. They've set a level of performance that's kind of here now, and it's almost just their level. People are more surprised when they drop below it as opposed to when they're kind of on it or slightly above it, which is a great place for Ireland to be.
Yeah, and if we're talking about players who are on it at that level every single week, Josh van der Flier, obviously World Player of the Year on Sunday night. Like, I think given his performances over the last year, we've kind of just become conditioned to him playing unbelievably well every single week, and we're kind of no longer surprised by it when it does happen. But when you just put it beside the names of the people who've won it, third Irish player only to ever win it beside Johnny Sexton and Keith Wood. And if you just look at some of the back rows who've won that award, like Peter Steph Dutoit, you have Thierry Dussoir, Richie McCaw. I mean, we're talking some of the all-time greats of the back row and of World Rugby on that list.
Absolutely. And I suppose I was lucky enough to spend a number of years with Josh in Leinster, and he's mentioned it himself. It hasn't always gone his way. There was other back rows playing in that position who were maybe in better form. The likes of Will Connors, who was playing unbelievable rugby for a period of time before injuries kind of got on top of him a small bit, and hopefully, fingers crossed, he comes out the other side of that soon. But Josh is just the ultimate example of persistence. He just shows up every day. He's constantly trying to improve. He's constantly working on his game, and not just like one or two elements of it. Don't get me wrong. He knows what his strengths are, and he's constantly trying to turn them into kind of super strengths per se. But then he kind of knows the stuff that he's maybe not at the level that he wants to be at, and he's constantly just hammering the rock on that. He's an unbelievable example to, like, not just young players but all players as to how he goes about his business and how he does his work. And then aside from that, he's an unbelievably nice fella. He is literally one of the nicest guys you'd ever meet. So he's a proper full package.
Yeah, like Bert, we were out at the HBC a couple of days after he'd been, last week, it was just after he'd been kind of nominated for the award, and we were saying, like, it seems like every time we speak to you, Josh, you're either getting nominated for award or you're after winning one, whether it was Rugby Writers a few weeks back or it was European Player of the Year, Leinster's Player of the Year, the Irish Rugby Players Association. But as Mick kind of alluded to, it's just over 18 months ago. It's less than 2 years ago when he wasn't really in the picture with Ireland. Will Connors was ahead of him. And I know part of his, Will Connors has gone through injury hell since then, and that kind of opened the door. But it's not so much even the fact that he's been unbelievable for 12, 18 months now. It's the fact that he had to, first of all, get back into the team to do it. He wasn't kind of doing it based, with a nice foundation of I'm going to be here in the team every single week.
No, but also I think credit to him, he's evolved his game, and particularly that ball carry aspect. Will Connors made his name and got into the team as a outstanding defender. Now Will has got so many other strings to his bow. Josh Van der Fleer, I remember, coming through age grade and as a youngster in Leinster was just incredibly high work rate, because incredibly high work rate, but he wasn't a ball carrier. And I think that ability to add that layer to his own strength and the effectiveness of it has made him, go from being in the mix to being World Player of the Year and a key guy for Ireland. And there's lots of competition. There's lots of good sevens in Ireland. But at the moment, you couldn't see any of them push Josh Van der Fleer out of the team. And it suits it's just the balance of the back row as well that Ireland are going with, the way Josh plays. So I look at credit to him. It's very difficult to evolve your game to that extent. You generally see people, making small improvements, but he's transformed his ball carrying, and that's been, I think, the area that's pushed him ahead of a lot of other good sevens in Ireland.
Yeah, certainly has, and I think he's well deserving of a World Player of the Year, and congratulations to him. On the URC back this weekend, Ulster Zebras Friday night, Leinster and Glasgow 3:15 on Saturday afternoon, and then at 7:35 at Thomond Park as Munster against Connacht. We'll start on that one, and I'll talk about Connacht first, actually, guys. Mick, for you first, obviously in the last couple of weeks, Andy Friend confirmed he's leaving, and I know he said yesterday it's something that the players and everyone at Connacht has pretty much known for some people 12 months, some people even longer than that. But even though it's been in the pipeline, it's something they need to be wary about, that the season doesn't fizzle out, because over the last few weeks, just before the break, they started to get things back on track. They had 3 wins out of 4, pulled one out of the fire against the Ospreys. So they're kind of coming into this with a nice little run of form together. And it's just important that it doesn't all fizzle out over the course of the season, because we've seen it happen so many times when a coach announces they're going to depart.
Yeah, I think that's very interesting point. The only thing I would say about the Andy Friend situation, and I know he's done a lot of coaching over the last number of years, but in the last kind of 12 months, having spoken to a couple of the guys in Connacht, I don't think he's done a huge amount of coaching. I think the coaching reins have kind of been handed over to the likes of Pete Wilkins and Mossy Lawler and Devault, to look after the rugby side of things, and then Andy's maybe had some of the crapper conversations in terms of, you're playing this week, you're not playing that week, we're maybe not keeping you on at the end of the season, like the really crap jobs, and finding someone to do that role is pretty tough, in general. But I think from a coaching point of view, the lads who are actually playing the games, there won't be a huge amount of complacency, because they know the coaches that are actually coaching them aren't really going anywhere next year.
Like Pete's still going to be there. Deval's going to be, all those guys are still going to be around next season.
Yeah, and they're going to be throwing lads' names forward depending on their performance to whoever comes in. So it's I can't see there being a massive amount of complacency from a playing point of view. I just think it's going to be really interesting to see who comes in next to replace Andy Friend.
It's set up really nicely for this weekend, Bernard, isn't it? Because it's fresh in the memory, the game in early October when Connacht completely outplayed Munster. And it looks, I know Mac Hansen's a big injury out for Connacht, but it looks like they're going to have the bulk of their internationals available. Mike Prendergast said all of the Munster guys are going to be there and ready to go. They've got players coming back from injury as well. So it looks like not only are going to have a game with high stakes, because a win is absolutely vital for both teams, but we're probably going to get 2 pretty good starting 15s out there as well this weekend.
Yeah, that's brilliant to hear that Munster have their internationals available, because I wasn't sure that. I think Leinster won't play. Or
I think
certainly
it's something along the lines of, I think they can only play 7 of the next 9
yes.
matches in this block or something. So it just looks like, all things going to plan, they're going to have them out this weekend and maybe rest them in a game further down the line.
Yeah, and look, you can see why this is must win for Munster. Connacht aren't in a bad position overall in terms of when you look at who they played. You know, obviously going to South Africa early, playing Leinster at home. They beat the Ospreys. Probably be good if they didn't get a bonus point against the Ospreys. You know, the Ospreys were missing their Welsh internationals, but they got that win, and they're kind of just about where they should be, but. They're going to have to start picking up points, and you know, this could, a win away to Munster would be absolutely massive for them, and obviously would be a big blow to Munster. I thought there was enough in Munster's last performance against Ulster where you could see it starting to click. Obviously, the Springbok match in Páirc Uí Chaoimh, there would have been a huge feel-good factor from the nature of that, and that's probably all Munster needed to get it going. It was just a little bit of confidence from a good performance, and I think they had, you know, a decent performance against Ulster, ball in hand anyway, and then obviously South Africa was excellent. So yeah, that you'd expect Munster to take it to another level now, particularly with their internationals back, and start to collect some points.
Yeah, and even make it as bad as Munster have been, and I know that their fixtures list ahead is quite tough, but the table itself, there is scope to move up that table pretty quickly, because there isn't a huge amount between where Munster are. I can't remember exactly where the table, knocking around 10th, we'll say, or even just below it, and moving up into the top half. Like there's not much more than a win or two between those sides.
No, completely. I'm actually looking at the table here, and you know, if they get maybe 2 wins, like it immediately brings them up to 6th in the table. You know, as Birch mentioned, I think the confidence that they'll take from how they played against Ulster, and particularly that game against South Africa A, is going to be huge. As well as that, since they kind of stopped playing games during these international windows, it's very tough from a player's, and I can only imagine from a coach's point of view, to actually keep players up, if that makes sense, you know. So I'd say Munster were unbelievably thankful to have that game in the middle, not just to, you know, keep getting minutes into lads' legs, but on top of that, kind of let them have a focus, you know, let them have a match week, because 3 weeks without a game, when you've been playing games consistently as a player, feels like an unbelievably long time. You know, you feel like you've gone off season, pre-season, which is obviously a bit of a grind, then into the season, and then you almost kind of feel like you're coming back into a mini pre-season, you know, which can sometimes be pretty taxing mentally. So I think that game against South Africa A is going to stand Munster in better stead than people might realize.
Yeah, even just in terms of the getting a couple of minutes into people and giving them a little focus in between that 3-week break.
For sure. And if nothing else, like, we got Paddy Patterson's post-match interview out of it, which was a real gem.
different broadcaster. We're not going to mention that one. Different broadcaster. No, on Leinster and Glasgow, Birch, before we finish up. So obviously we're expecting they'll be resting a lot of their frontline players, but it does look like they might have Ryan Baird coming back in, Ronan Kelleher potentially coming back in, if not this week, then next week. And you know, they're 2 players who 6-7 months ago we would have considered to be an important part of the Ireland setup. And I know for Baird, obviously, it was he would have probably had some involvement had it not been for that really bad concussion he got a few weeks back in that Sharks game. Kelleher's had his injury problems, so you know, even from an Irish point of view, without the frontline internationals, there's a lot to be interested in with Leinster at the moment.
Yeah, for sure. And I met James Lowe on Saturday in the stadium, and he's only a couple of weeks away as well. So look, the reality is Leinster have more depth than anyone else in this competition, and they can easily afford to not use their international this week. But will still put out a phenomenal team. Like they're unbeaten so far. They maybe aren't hitting the heights, bar that Sharks game, that they have in previous seasons, but yet they're they're tinkering with their game plan a little bit, and it's still very, very effective. So yeah, you would expect RDS, the fellas, they had a bit of a run out against Chile, but that was a younger team, and it was great to see them bring in some AIL players who've been going well as well, just to recognise that. But what I've always admired about Leinster is their ability to come from cold to hot very quickly. They're not like other teams who maybe need 2 or 3 games to get going. They have been very good, and it's probably down to the level of competition at training, which Mick obviously has been a big part of. But that they're able to get match like simulation A's BBs on a Tuesday, whereas other teams have to step it up then when they play. So it's great to see some of those players you mentioned come back, particularly Kelleher. Obviously, imagine being Ron Kelleher, seeing Dan Sheehan just take advantage of every minute that he's had, and set the marker very high. But Kelleher in his own right is a very good hooker, and from a Leinster point of view, having both those fellas go at it over the next 7, 8, 10 years, it's a very healthy place to be.
Was James Lowe giving you any co-commentary tips? Was he?
No, I didn't ask him, but first I wouldn't need to ask him. He's not the quietest guy around. But he's good value.
Did you watch the? Did you watch?
I didn't.
Co-coms on that Chile
I heard
game?
he was doing co-coms for Chile.
An absolute natural.
I know him. He's very good value. I did
your shelf life is short here now, Birch. If he's gonna, if James Lowe wants to retire anytime soon,
I think look at with his fashion sense and his flowing locks, I think he'd be pitch side. Co-com won't be as glamorous enough for him. The Jamie Heaslip and those lads need to watch out.
Mick, finally, before we finish up on Ulster, that win against Munster has been absolutely massive for them just before the break, because they've been, they lost out in that game against the Sharks, and we don't know what's going to happen result-wise with that, if they're going to be able to replay it. But they had to dog it out against Munster, and I know it nearly went against them in the end, but that's going to be a massive 4 points by the end of the season.
Absolutely. Like, geez,
it gives them a bit of credit in the bank over the next few weeks as well. For sure.
Like, talk about great signings. Like, Rory Sutherland comes straight in, gets 2 unbelievable turnovers against Munster. Then Dwayne from Hewlin obviously gets a big one at the end. But like, if you're looking at it from a momentum graph point of view, I think if that game had gone on for a couple of minutes longer, Ulster were going to be in big trouble. They've got a nice, I suppose, like Dave Zebre at home on Friday night. Obviously, I played for both teams. Zebre massively struggle coming to play against the Irish sides, particularly away. They'll have their internationals back, but like the internationals from Zebre are going to be fairly knackered, I'd say. So it's a nice way for Ulster to kind of ease themselves back into games following the mini preseason, as I called it earlier on. And just touching on Birch's point about how impressive Leinster are in terms of going from cold to hot. Like, in the training environment, A's v B's, I was on the B's more often than not. And when you're actually getting that opportunity to play, regardless of how much time has gone before where there's been no game or you haven't played, that if you're not taking that opportunity or you're not making an impact on the game, on top of doing what your core role is, the likelihood of you getting a game when these kind of games come up again is pretty low. So I'm looking forward to seeing a couple of guys getting a crack now this week if the internationals aren't playing for Leinster. And I'm obviously always gunning for lads in those situations. So I hope they can all put in big performances.
Yeah, and that's actually like it's very similar to what Mike Prendergast was saying yesterday. We were asking him about the 10 situation there, and are you getting to a point where you kind of just maybe have to nail your colours to the mast of one player and give them an extended run? And he's kind of saying that the competition will sort itself out. That if there's 3 players gunning for 2 spots, I mean, it's only really good for the team ultimately, because never mind if you have 1 player breathing down your neck, but if you have 2 players in your position breathing down your neck who are either in an international camp or on the fringes of an international camp, it's it has to drive performances, and if it doesn't, there's something drastically wrong.
No, completely. Like, one of Pat Lamb's favorite kind of quotes when I was in Connacht was, performance is your only currency. So, like, there's no point going and rattling on his front door after the team's being selected and saying, oh, why aren't I playing this week? Because if you haven't played well, you can just literally swing the laptop around and go, well, what's the story with this? What's going on here? And then you're being measured against a guy who's going for the same position who may have done those things better. So, I think that's going to be, same's going to apply for Munster. As you said, it's all just going to figure itself out. Whoever's performing the best is going to play. And keen to get your thoughts. Like, obviously Joey left Leinster because he wanted to play 10 regularly, and he didn't want to play 15 a huge amount, which is fine, But I think it's going to be really interesting now over the next couple of weeks, if Crowley is playing really good rugby, whether they do say, geez, we'd love to get Joey on the pitch at the same time. Will we shift him back to 15? And what the reaction is going to be off the back of that as well.
Yeah, I think it's going to be fascinating. Sorry, Niall. I think that's going to be fascinating because I'm not sure how much Joey wants to play fullback. Certainly the Connacht Munster game when he played fullback, he didn't look very happy, didn't look very comfortable. But look for him as well and for Ireland, if he's able to be an outstanding fullback, as well as being an outstanding 10, that improves Ireland and improves Munster. I'm sure he preferred to be on the field than not on the field. But look, it all depends on how bad his injury is, and
he's due to complete the return to play protocols this week, according to Munster. So the plan or the expectancy is that all things going to plan, he would be available for selection this weekend.
Okay. Well, look, it'd be interesting then what Prendy does. I mean, I think from what I've read from Prendy and heard from him, I think he really sees Crowley as having a lot of the attributes to implement the type of game he wants to play, and it might be just look at Frisch is coming back now, and obviously he looks like a talented player. It's not all on Joey at all. Joey's obviously capable of getting the Munster attack going, but it was probably unlucky for him that Fekitoa hadn't really found his feet. Just things weren't happening for them, and now we see Crowley and we're thinking, right, maybe he's the key to it. But it might be just the time in the saddle that Joey will have had under Prendy, and obviously other personnel stepping up that both can play a key role in Munster's attacking game evolving.
Yeah, going to be really interesting to see over this block of games who gets the bulk of the minutes, particularly with Champions Cup and big Interpro matches as well. But Bernard, Mick, we'll leave it there. Thanks a million for joining us. Mick, very best of luck this weekend against Terranure. Birch, have you a match with Bective?
Yeah, we're playing Gorey, tough game on Saturday, and then I'm down to Limerick afterwards for CoCom for Munster Connacht. So looking forward to that.
Busiest man in rugby.
Well,
guys,
lads.
Thanks a million. We'll speak to you next week.
Lads.